Just it takes Zoom a minute to make some API calls to YouTube. So give me the 20 more seconds or so.
No worries. If at any point, you know, the connection cuts out or you can't hear me properly, or, you know, just let me know. Okay, we'll get there.
We're live.
All right, I'm gonna hijack Gene's answer here. We are live on Merge PHP on YouTube. So we did start a new channel. We were, for the first year or so, we were on the Austin PHP, sorry, the Austin Tech Videos channel, but we did start a new YouTube channel. So that is, if you just search for Merge PHP on YouTube, you can find us there. But I posted the answer in the Q&A. Should be in the Gene's question there, as a reply to Gene's question. Yep, so if you want to follow along, and feel free to ask questions for Paul during the presentation, either here on Zoom or on YouTube. So you can join us in either place. So thank you all for joining us here. November, Merge PHP. We are growing quickly here. So yep, I think we're ready to start, Paul. So please take it away.
Cool. Hi, everybody. So basically, this talk is about, as you can see, continuous delivery, which might mean a few different things to different people. Also, you'll notice that on the slide it says Cdu Foundation. That's a new part of the Linux Foundation group that's a few years old now, and you know, I like to speak to and collaborate with the other members of the Cdu Foundation and get their opinions and get their points of view, and then myself is pretty much giving my own views, but also a collective view of what what's happening within the Cdu Foundation, and also just more abroad in the whole open source world. Basically, some of you may know me, some of you may not know me. I've been doing open source for a long time, and I'm part of the Jenkins stuff, part of PHP things, PHP Fig stuff. I do standards, PSRs, and I also organise conferences. The Scotland PHP conference was last month, so we still managed to put a conference on, and it was a good turnout. So it's good to be back in the real world. And like I said, Cdu Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation, and it's a new group. But you'll see that in more detail as the talk goes on. And professionally, I work as a consultant, so I run companies for people. I also work as an architect, developer, DevOps, testing, quality, pretty much most things I get my hands on. And I spend, sorry, one sec. When I work as a consultant, I spend a lot of time doing CI/CD, and that's basically a specialism that I've been doing for years, doing public speaking at conferences, and doing training on CI/CD solutions and technologies, and you know, the hard stuff, and also going into companies and fixing up all the CI stuff. So over the years, I got a lot of experience in this field, and yeah, embedding processes and unbreaking companies and putting smooth things in. The talk is, I've broken it up into a few sections. So there's a preamble, which is kind of like the story before today, so like how we got here in time, and so go covering like what traditional CI/CDs look like, very briefly, what changed in the world about CI/CD, what challenges and blockers occurred a few years ago, and then how this began triggering innovation a few years ago as well. And that's ultimately what I want to talk to you about, and showcase some stuff about the innovations that have been happening under the hood. Not many people know about it. If you're involved in certain parts of the internet, you might be aware of some of this stuff happening, but it's not yet hit critical mass, but it is on that trajectory, and it's increasing. It's just, I want like this talk to give you a heads up of what's actually coming and help you understand that as well, so that when you do see this stuff popping up, you'll actually recognize the trend kicking in and the curve happening, and and the open source world. And then effectively what innovations we have now, and also where the innovations, where members of the Cdu Foundation, the projects and the open source community that are part of that initiative, where things are going to be going. So what to expect in the coming years as we re-innovate again. Yeah, go forward. I hope that made sense so far. In terms of questions, somebody already mentioned before, but it's just, if you notice, there is a slide number at the very bottom. So if you want to ask a question about a slide, you can put the slide number, like slide number 5, and then say something. That helps me figure out what you're asking. One of the many things we have to adapt to when doing the online talks. So we'll explain why we're here. So this is effectively traditional CI/CD, and most people should understand this. This is just a monolithic architecture of an application, and largely for like 20 years, easily 30 years, most applications look like this, right? And so therefore, our CI pipelines look like this, and that should, for the monolithic application, that worked, and that historically has been fine. The tools we had, for example, like Jenkins, that still is the largest CI platform in the world, but historically that was like the best tool. As you can tell, years later, things have moved on. Other people are using different companies and different solutions. But prior to that point, Jenkins was the best tool for the job, because we, as the open source world, we created it for ourselves to manage what we had to deal with at the time in businesses, which was monolithic things. So at that time, it was fit for purpose. And ultimately, this is what, you should recognize this. This is just pipelines and deployment pipelines, and that's traditional CI. So life, for the long time, life was simple and predictable, stable. We knew what to do. It was just a matter of doing the work and building the pipelines and stuff like that, and to get it to work. And then something happened, basically. Something changed. So effectively, globally, software organizations and internet companies are now have to deliver more and more software. And the rate at which they deliver that software and the scale is just exponentially been increasing and increasing and increasing over time, as people in the industry will have experienced and be part of, as developers being part of this. Also with the rise of smartphones and access to technology a lot easier, then all these things talk to the web, they talk to back-end services, they talk to web pages and stuff. So the demand also respectively shot up. Now for organizations, that means you can't scale a monolith, you can only scale it to a certain degree. And that's ultimately, if you go back like say 8 or 9 years ago, that's when the internet and the traditional pipelines or traditional architecture hit critical mass, where they had to start using distributed systems architectures to solve these problems. Distributed systems architectures have been around for a long time, but it wasn't really that prevalent for web applications as much, to be honest. But when we got to this point in time, then ultimately we had to start breaking up the applications into smaller pieces and scaling them, in their own aspect. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to say, is that at that point, the CI solutions like Jenkins and stuff started becoming, well, it was not all the CI solutions at that point pretty much were not that fit for purpose. And that's kind of where we're at. So the unprecedented demand has created new challenges, and then it's been hurting organizations, because when we're trying to build CI solutions for not one application anymore, you've got 5 or 10, right? And the challenges that arise and the things that hurt you is like, well, we had one application, it was easy. Now we've got 5, but they have dependencies between them. If you deploy one, then the other one talks to that, you might get corruptions and all this. So now we had all this, now we have one pipeline, we have 5 pipelines, right? Or do you have one pipeline that built all 5, and it was nobody really knew what the best way to structure your CI, well, your CI and your CD systems and your triggers. For example, when you raise pull requests, when you merge code, typically when you merge code to master branch or the main branch, it would go to staging, for example. That's a traditional thing, but you can't do that anymore, because there's like, loads and loads of pieces flying around, right? Well, that makes sense. So effectively what changed is our application architecture went from that to that. And so you had went from one pipeline on the left to 4 pipelines right? When did they kick off? And what happens in the order, and what happens anything in general, right? So this is the challenge, and that's why we got, oh my God, my phone's ringing during a call. Can you believe that? Sorry, I'm putting my cell phone on silent. There we are. Okay, anyway, so the blockers, so as a result of the change and the demand for change, the pipeline development is becoming really complex. And maybe if you're a developer working in a company and other people take care of the pipelines for you, then you may not be facing the struggles and the frustrations as much as others, but certainly there's loads of people that do feel the pain and the pressure of things not working quite right, things not being built really that well. And so it just became really hard. And then ultimately when you build, there's similar steps between you. You have 5, 10, 20 pipelines. You want to write something, you want to share code between them. So that became complex. Ultimately, everybody in the world, mostly everybody in the world at that time was using Jenkins, and Jenkins is just, as a DSL, has a scripting language, so people can do all sorts of funky things. And they try to do lots of like create shared libraries that multiple pipelines can like pull in a shared library. And there was, so people were just like trying to solve all this mad stuff in different ways, and it just became really challenging and a bit hard to deal with, to be honest. So effectively there's just no rules anymore. We had monolithic, we had certain ways to do things, and then bam, what we call microservice architecture, right? Or really just distributed systems. And yeah, and then for years it was just like that. There was just no standardized way to deal with it really, and it was just a bit chaotic. And so private companies stepped in and said, well, we're going to show you how to build Jenkins pipelines and how we did it with Jenkins, or we did it with another system. And so if you've heard of Weaveworks perhaps and CodeFresh, there are some examples of many companies that release blogs online, and they're if you Google for like how to do CI/CD development for microservice architectures, these are the companies that pop up, the Googles and the Weaveworkses and stuff. And so that became like a standard, a model to follow. And then all the companies started, all the developers and DevOps people and whatever, they started trying to emulate these companies, Weaveworks and CodeFresh. So like, oh yeah, let's do it like them, but then tweak it slightly because it's not perfect for us. And so everybody had tried to, if you were trying to do best practice, was to copy these companies, but the majority of people didn't, and they just tweaked the code that they had for the monoliths into trying to handle microservice stuff, and it didn't really work. But anyway, so it started, private companies led the way, the start of the innovation. So this is the trigger now. And then companies like, then the second point here is about companies providing like microservice-based ideas like CircleCI and Bitbucket. So now you've got proprietary systems. So the first set of companies are open. They give you the code. They show you how they did it with Jenkins and other things. And that's good. So you can take that and build it yourself. But then the second point here is the proprietary companies innovated even further and created solutions, general purpose solutions around, multiple services being built and then promoted up to different environments with multiple applications running at one time and not a single one. So that was another trigger of innovation. And so at that point, those companies started leading the way, and then now, so that's kind of where we're at right now, I would say. So we're kind of, everybody's looking forward to try to use more of these modern systems that are hosted and just kind of work generally, and you have to figure it out. However, the drawback, to the last point here, the drawback is that the proprietary, the general purpose systems, they're largely known to be like primitive in their functionality and their flexibility, and they're opinionated. It's like they're opinionated, this is how you do something in our software. And so what has happened because of the transition to like cloud hosted, hosted stuff like CircleCI and that, is that will only ever, you can only ever behave, that system can only ever behave to whatever behavior that the company make it. So you can only change so many, there's set configuration files, configuration values that you can change. So like there's only so much you can do with the tool. That's what I'm trying to say. And you have to then mold your organization's sort of flows and processes. A lot of companies are struggling with this. As a CI/CD consultant from company to company, I see this like almost in every single company. They're like, it works one way, they liked it, now they're using these tools, and and like, oh, but this Circle CI or Bitbucket doesn't really work like that, and it doesn't have that feature, we can't do that. And then you have to restructure the software development life cycle and the release cycles and stuff. And so you're getting benefits because you're getting innovation, you're getting hosted systems, but then there's a lot of drawbacks as well. So I'm just sort of explaining like where we're at right now and the pros and the cons. So that started like what, 8-9 years ago, and then about 45 years after the innovation, just go back a slide. So after the innovation of Circle CI, of the Waveworkses, and then the Circle CIs, that's 2 waves. Then the open source community starts to kick in, right? And there's been I've been giving this a lot of attention over the years, and there's projects that were starting up that were solving these problems before people really started noticing, and then more people jumped on it and more jumped on it. But the main trigger that is actually the underpinning innovation is called cloud native, which means Kubernetes, right? The beast, the thing that's literally taking over all the infrastructure stuff. Cloud native means if you can get it to work in Kubernetes, it works on any cloud. That's what Kubernetes does. It's a declarative, YAML files and stuff. And so you're kind of agnostic to the hosting platform, whether it's Amazon or Google or Azure or whatever. So if you can make it working in Kubernetes, you can run your software, it's a Docker container, and it has a port number, right? And things can talk to it. So if you can create a service in Kubernetes, it runs on any cloud, on any cluster, effectively, right? And that's the beauty and the power of what it means to be cloud native. And so the open source, once cloud native tooling started coming into place, managing clusters, making deployments to clusters in general, the CI and the CD community started noticing that and thinking, they've solved that for themselves for just building Kubernetes and the Kubernetes ecosystem, but we could actually use that to help us with our deployment stuff. We can reuse that tool, import that, and and customize it like we do, like in PHP lands, we take library composer packages, and then we wrap things around it and make a new thing. That's ultimately what had started happening about 4 or 5 years ago, and people starting to clock on that we can take that, we can take this, and yeah, I hope that made sense what we're trying to explain. So there's a couple of new innovations. So the initial innovation that I want to highlight is something called Tecton, and then later on came Jenkins X, and then after that came Flux. And I'll explain these projects in detail as the talk goes on, so don't worry about if you haven't heard of these projects. But before I go further, I just want to explain what the Cdu Foundation and Cloud Native is. So you have the Linux Foundation, which is like the operating system, and then you've got like all the other sub foundations are underneath that. All the main open source projects are hosted in there, or many of them are. And then under that, you've got the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and then inside of that is the container for incubator for the project, the Kubernetes project, and many other cloud native projects that are like world, the 5 in the world, right? And then Cdu Foundation is the organization that I'm part of, and that's a sister foundation. And what we do is we take cloud native tools we take things from the cloud native landscape, as it's called, and then we import them and utilize them for CD and CI contexts. So we're basically reusing and repurposing cool stuff to create the solutions, the tools that are solutions to the problem we had way back, right? So you without having to pay companies for their stuff. So open source. So the initial one was Tecton. So effectively, it's a pipeline runner. It's really bare bones. That's why probably most people haven't heard of it. It's a lot of like YAML files and stuff to say like how to link your pipelines together. Whereas in Jenkins, it's just like a list of commands, right? And they link, and it's simple. And Bitbucket, you've got a YAML file and you can set it right. But Tecton's a little bit more bare bones than that, but it's an excellent runner. And under the hood, so the ironic thing is, like the Circle CIs and the Bitbucket companies and Git Lab, under the hood, they're probably using, they probably made their own Tecton, or they probably are using the cloud native tooling these days now, but back then they probably just reinvent, like they built it first and then Tecton came along and built basically what these companies are providing under the hood conceptually, except you can host it yourself, and it's just one container, and it's cheap, and it runs. So that people will get starting to use these on cloud native on clusters instead of paying for the bigger companies. But it was really so bare bones that it didn't really take off until more projects started consuming Tekton and then making larger and grander, more solutions out of it. And it's Tekton is a cloud native, so any Kubernetes cluster, so you build it once, you can build a pipeline and make it work and get the steps right once, and it will run on any Kubernetes cluster in the world. So you don't need to compare to other solutions where you couldn't do that. You don't have that portability. So that's the beauty of having a Tekton pipeline, is you can just say to a company, right, do you have Kubernetes? Yes, okay, I'll attach my Tekton pipeline to your cluster, boom, and it runs. And if not, then you can just say, well, I'm going to get a very cheap cluster with like one machine, and I'll whack Tekton on there, and then you'll have you'll have the out of the box thing that I built before, right? So that's the portability aspect. Now, since then, we've got a bunch of new stuff, new cool innovations that I wanted to highlight. I'll go into detail of a few of the projects, but not all of them. So it's worth like looking at the slides or taking a screenshot or something, so you can research these. So the type of talks I give usually are like, there's a lot of information that I condense into like a short period of time so that you can get more value for your time to learn. And so I recommend you like research these, do a Google search, maybe you look at YouTube and see some stuff. But a very, very brief summary then. So the ones that I've not got a dedicated slide on, there's things called kept, there's things in Hermit. These like help local development for people, so you can connect your local machine to a remote Kubernetes cluster and have your Docker container running in the cloud, but it syncs the changes, so you can actually develop live on the internet. But on your like debugging, for example, do like var dumps and whatever in your PHP code, or you don't want to run it on local machine because there's so many other services that need to run that you can't run the whole cluster on your local machine, but you can run the small just individual, but then it will like go in the cluster anyway. So that's just a use case that of like what the local development tools do, like Hermit and stuff. Anyway, the main players here is Jenkins X, Argo, and Flux, right? And there's a few others to help in a few things. So Cdu Foundation, these are the 4 founding projects of the Cdu Foundation. Jenkins X, which is the same team, same company, but it's obviously built on Kubernetes. We've got Spinnaker. I believe it was started by the people at Google, but I might be wrong. If my memory serves me correctly, Google built a tool to manage their CD processes, and I think that spun off into Spinnaker. Now, I could be completely wrong, but that's just what my memory tells me. Anyway, it's the oldest and most mature like cloud native, like modern system that you can run and host yourself without you can configure it completely. It's open source, right? And Tekton, I've mentioned that. And then as of 3rd of August, just now, another project jumped on, which is Shipwright. And as you can see on the right side, it's an aid, it's a tool for managing stuff in a cloud native situation on a Kubernetes cluster. But yeah, building containers, and these are basically abstractions or innovations or things that make it easier, further away from the DevOps / infrastructure engineer side and more to the developers, kind of like DevOps, so where you just get like a fancy config file and then you tweak a few values and then all this awesome infrastructure stuff just happens for you. And ultimately that's what a lot of these projects, smaller projects, are doing. Also within the Cdu Foundation, there's something called a SIG that this is quite similar to that we borrowed. So the Cdu Foundation team, we borrowed this from the CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. They have SIGs for like Kubernetes cares about like networking or security or like interoperability, right? And so we basically reused that in the Cdu Foundation, and we're looking at interoperability similar to the PHP fig, which was the point of that, which is interoperability. So I'm kind of reusing the stuff and the experience and the interest I had for when I was working on the PHP Fig stuff, I'm going to be helping doing that on the CD side. And so that allows you to like do one thing, and then it can run on Jenkins X, it can run on Argo, it can run on Spinnaker, it can run on Flux, and and the others. But they're not there yet. But that's hopefully the point we'll get to, really. And then there's another cool thing. There's an event sig, which is looking about an event-driven CD system, kind of like vendor agnostic events that you can trigger between systems. So like you can have like Jenkins doing your old school stuff. You don't want to change it. It works or whatever. And then to innovate, to get to start to use things like Flux and Helm and Flux and Argo and Jenkins X, you might want to just like strangle parts of it out. Like, oh, we'll keep the CI here, but then we'll make a call to the CD system, and you can like, you can. Oh, it's like that's like a legacy modernization strategy, right? The strangler pattern, and it's an easy way to start to innovate as well. Anyway, so there's another thing that's the innovation. So this is a new innovation. This is quite a high level topic, so I'm hoping maybe most people have heard of this, even just like buzzwords mentioned. But GitHub is another innovation that's recently happened that I wanted to highlight. And that came out of the demand for where we're at now, which is we have to track all of our applications, so like 10, 20, 30 applications. So like what versions of the machine, what environments are running, or what applications are running in what environments, and what versions of those. So what's the version of the user app on staging, and what's the version of it in production, and how do we roll back, and how do we do that? And so you had to track all this stuff, and it's really hard now we have it in plain sight, right? Everything's tracked in Git repos or Git branches, and there could be like a staging branch and a production branch on one repo, and in that repo, it's actually the manifest for what this target state of your app, your clusters, your platform should look like. So you can say like, I want 5 applications, and this app's running this version of a Docker image, and this one's running that version, like version 1.1. This one's running version 1.8. It's a different application and different branches. And so effectively GitOps is you use pull requests that use a development flow to manage the deployment of the the deployment of applications. And so what happens is these CD tools like Argo CD, Flux, etc., they're listening for Git changes on the repo. And because you're doing GitOps as a practice, they understand like when you make a pull request from the staging branch to the production branch on a Git repo, and in that pull request, you're changing one text file that says, I want to release version 1.1 of the software to 1.2. And that's a pull request. I mean, as a pull request, it triggers, right? It triggers off the CD systems, and then they do things. And then when you merge the pull request into production branch, then it will receive that state change. Like as on the right side, you see it says observed state. So these tools are observing your Git repos, and whenever you change, it notices a merge happening, it will automatically make your applications in production look the way it is in the Git repo. So it's declarative, desired, rather than implicit, like, oh, these things happen. And so you can also rebuild your website. So if anything's corrupted, or you need to do disaster recovery, or you need to do anything, you can literally redeploy your entire platform production system to another cluster in the exact same way, because the state is declared in the Git files, right? And in the text files, in the YAML files and stuff in your Git repo. And so anyway, there's, again, a lot of these topics probably deserve their own talk, and I'm just trying to skim over as much detail as possible. So anyway, that's GitOps, and that's why it's desirable for people to have. And yeah, to be honest, I just explained all that. It's just that last point. It says it's reacting to change, and then things happen. And yeah, Argo CD and Flux CD are the main players in the GitOps world. They do it really well, and they encourage GitOps as a strategy. So their applications are actually designed, they're actually better than the other CD solutions, because GitOps actually enhances makes it easier for things to happen, for you to navigate, to make things happen. So it's good synergy. So as I'd say, I would showcase a few tools that have came out. So Jenkins X is an opinionated out of the box solution, but it offers you absolutely everything out of the box, and it's super simple. I've been using it in production, and I started helping out on the project a while ago. It can be installed on any Kubernetes cluster. So if you don't have a CI system, you can just say like go bang, and it will install itself onto the cluster, and then you'll have lots of shiny stuff basically. It makes clusters for you, which is pretty cool. So if you actually don't have one, you just give it your credentials, and it just goes onto the cloud you want, and just makes a cluster, and then it installs itself on the cluster, and then you get a full CI system ready to rock. And I'd highly recommend you go to the Jenkins X website and check out the YouTube videos, documentation, conference talks, stuff. I think Jenkins X is definitely one that will, because it's just Jenkins in itself, but it's a new product, but it's from the same ecosystem and community. And because Jenkins is still the largest thing, this is, in my opinion, the project that's going to eventually get the most traction and like come back and take care of everybody again in the new world of microservices and all that stuff. And out of the box, Jenkins X creates environments for you with host names, subdomains, and that. So as you declare which environment you want, it's already got the environment set up just out of the box, and it's really clever. You'll see it for yourself if you look at the documentation. And then you just configure like how your promotion works. Like I've got local, and then maybe I've got preview or test 1, test 2, test 3, and then I've got staging, and then I might have pre-production, and then I have production. So you can tell it what you want, and it will go and make it for you, which is really clever. And so now one of the reasons why Jenkins in itself was hard is because you had to like host Jenkins yourself, but also set it up and configure everything. And so it became more of a maintenance burden to get it to work. Whereas obviously now the world has reacted and came back full circle. Jenkins X is basically says, hey developer, what do you want to do? And then it's really relatively simple. You just tell it what you want, and then it just goes and does it. And you're like, that's exactly what I wanted from Jenkins in the first place, but it wasn't that easy. And now this is the whole point of making cloud native approachable and accessible. And yeah, it's GitHub powered by default. You can turn it off if you don't need it, but by default, it's got good stuff there. So Jenkins X is relatively new, right? For the past couple of years, 3-4 years, Argo's been, Spinnaker and Argo have been absolute top dogs, and Argo's still like #1. Spinnaker has became a bit of a beast, ironically, a bit of a monolith in itself, and it's a bit larger and requires more setup as it's just grown and developed in features over the years. It's still an absolutely solid bet for CD solutions. If you've got Docker containers and you want to put them on the cloud, Spinnaker is absolutely tested and tried, and it's great. Second to that, I would say, is Argo. Now, Argo is the main player that utilizes the GitOps benefits a lot more than other solutions, right? As well as other modern solutions and other things, but GitOps they do. They're in the Argo team are at the heart of the innovation of taking all this stuff and utilizing it in practice and having a production ready and safe system. And they're very unopinionated. But whereas Jenkins X is quite opinionated as in like it just gives you solutions. A comparison in the PHP world would be like Zend framework historically was quite verbose, and you could set everything up yourself exactly how you like it, and then you would have it. Whereas say Laravel is more about like out of the box stuff, right? And so you can draw the same contrast between Jenkins X being opinionated, kind of like Laravel, and then you've got like Argo and the others where you can get an opinionated by default, but you can actually, it's designed for change much better and easier. So that's kind of what I'm trying to explain. There's another tool, just an example, Kubefella, and it's basically, if you've ever looked at a Kubernetes file, there's many of them you have to write, a service file, an ingress file for incoming traffic. You've also got your application itself. So the Docker container, the ports, the environment variables that need to go into the container, and loads of other stuff, right? So the Kubernetes files, they get really large. Now, people have taken that and abstracted against that again. So in your applications and your repo for your app, then you can have, I guess, a kubevela file rather than the Kubernetes files it would take to launch it on the cloud, onto a cluster. So it's an example where it only exposes things to the developers care about and leaves the hard stuff under the hood. You just say like, oh, I need a volume, I need a port 80 open, and then this is a domain name, and it will go and do all the stuff under the hood for you. So that's, again, the world is transitioning, and not just in general for applications, because kubevela is built just for applications or for anything. But when the CD world is being used and utilized and consumed by the larger tools to then make things just so developer friendly that you're like, oh my God, I can have any pipeline I want, I can have any environment I want, and just this, now it's just mostly like at our fingertips, and it's about to hit mass stuff, but still got some legs to go effectively, but it's getting more and more popular. So yeah, just an abstraction. So developers say, I want a web service, and then kubevela creates the underlying like YAML files, right? Instead of writing a few hundred lines yourself. So yeah, ultimately you go from like the standard 200 lines to host an application on a cluster. Kubevela, you can do it in about 20 lines, and it just does it for you. So as a developer, maybe a PHP developer, or just a developer, and you're not really Kubernetes savvy, that's an example where you can do that in your application. But this tool's also been consumed, right, by the CD tools. So that's kind of the end of what innovations have been happening. Again, there's a slide with all those different tools. Flux CD is like number 2, and it's fantastic. I recommend you check that out if you're hosting Docker containers in production. It's excellent as well. So an example of what to expect going forward in the future. So obviously GitOps is still maturing slightly, and a lot of the other tools and the communities are slowly, kind of like where we had Git as a tool, and then we had Git Flow. Remember, we had Git Flow, and we had Git first, and then eventually we figured out Git Flow, and then everybody sort of adopted Git Flow over the years and had their own version. So that's kind of what we're getting with GitOps now, the same for the deployment pipeline side. It's just people are starting to get adjusted to it now, but it's still got a lot of legs. A lot of unopinionated tools, like example like Tekton, which is just completely agnostic, and there's like so many other tools that I could mention, but they're on the Cdu Foundation website and other websites just in general on Google. You can search them, and these are all like doing little parts of the CI and CD and deployment type solutions, and there's loads of them, and then ultimately that's then being aggregated into solutions, and then those solutions are coming to the developers now, and you're just pressing buttons and spinning wheels really. Argo CD is genuinely driving us into the future, and like the innovation of pipelines. Also, Jenkins X has a CLI tool. It's not actually Jenkins X, it's called Jenkins X CLI. This is not released yet. This is me telling you before it's released, but Jenkins X CLI is kind of like you have a Jenkins X. So Jenkins X CLI can connect you can connect your application to an Argo or a Flux or a Jenkins X CD server. So if you've got all your old nasty pipelines, you could run a bash command that says JX CLI, deploy this, trigger this pipeline on an Argo thing that's running over here. So you can have all your new stuff running, all your Jenkins X stuff running nicely, but then the older applications, they're still stuck with the old pipelines. And so this way, Jenkins X is going to be like a way to like strangle pattern out, and it kind of like a sniper, and get you just trigger new stuff to replace the old stuff in your current things. So that's also a thing this is going to be coming. So when we talk about the innovation of pipelines, this is the new cool stuff I wanted to talk to you about. So traditionally, pipelines are webhook based and monolithic focused. So and honestly, so this is like where pipelines are at today, has not innovated much in 10 years, right? There's been not much of, when I say innovation, I mean not the projects, so not the tools that we're using. Like we used to use Jenkins a lot, now we use Bitbucket, and now we use something else. not those. I mean, what a pipeline consists of. So what does a pipeline consist of? It basically consists of a sequence of steps, right? That's 99.9% of all pipelines is a sequence of steps that happens, right? Now, that was good for monoliths, and it worked because there's a sequence. But now it's very different. But the way we've been able to build pipelines historically, remember we had the innovations of Weaveworks, then we have the innovations of Circle CI, and then we had this stuff. But the way our pipelines logically operate hasn't changed, right? Hasn't changed for the masses. But that's where you'll see, and as I continue the talk, you'll see what the mentality shift is going to be in how we build pipelines. So this hasn't hit like mass, not even like minor adoption yet. This is still like fresh, and it's happening under the hood, and this is what you're going to start seeing, right? So we're on the edge of reinventing pipelines to small, tiny pipelines, but they're actually event driven. So you would actually have a tiny little feature. This is quite similar to the innovations that came out of GitHub Actions, which is kind of the same idea, but not quite like where we're going to go as an open source community. But a little bit of inspiration and credit there for the way that they did things differently. Nonetheless, we're going to start building small pipelines. Like I'm a pipeline and I build an image, and I'm a pipeline and I build, I run a unit test suite, right? Or I run integration test or something. And so you'll have these small little tiny pipelines, and then they'll independently, and then they'll be able to talk to each other using events, which is actually going to be necessary because of the change to distributed systems architecture. The events are going to actually make it super easy, and you're going to see this in the coming months and years or so from projects like Jenkins X and Argo and Flux and the others that you're going to start to see on the web. So it's necessary for reasons that if aren't obvious to you now, you'll eventually realize when it hits you. And so it's literally having tiny pipelines. Now this is a new architecture that's called event-based pipeline architecture. That's kind of something that I made up, but we'll see what the real term is when it actually, becomes like official for everybody's using it. But yeah, event-driven architecture. Yeah, okay. So my point is that when we have this, one of the examples is pipelines no longer, a pipeline doesn't do something, a pipeline consumes an event or reacts to an event, does something, and then publishes another event to say, oh, I've done my bit. Now I've said complete. So let's say your pipeline is do a bit, build the Docker image and then run the unit tests and then, or run static analysis. So you would actually change and say, you wouldn't be prescriptive as to what's running next in a sequence. You would be, it's kind of like middleware. So you'd be saying Docker image build complete event. And then someone else will be listening to the build complete event, and then they'll do their job, and then they'll publish a unit test complete event, right? And then it will all start to orchestrate together and be really awesome and a lot simpler now. So event-based pipeline architectures, I gave you an example, but here we go. It's just you build and push the Docker image up to the web, and then that event then gets triggered to an event. So they do security scans on your Docker images to see if you get any vulnerabilities in your operating system versions and stuff, and then that one can trigger a deploy and run tests. Yeah. Anyway, you get the point. That's a duplicate slide. So the main the Argo project is an umbrella. They've actually got Argo workflows. So they classify this differently, and this is live and it's in production and it's tried and tested, and you can start to use this stuff or at least check it out, or maybe take inspiration from how these guys are doing it and take that back to your own companies. So Argo have got workflows and they've got events, and that's pipelines and the event-based stuff. So they work slightly differently. Depends on the complexity of your project. The more complex something is, the more necessity there is to split it into smaller parts, right? We do that with solid principles and decoupling and stuff, right? So the more harder your pipeline is, rather than traditionally with the old Jenkins stuff and traditionally with the bit buckets and stuff, you get complex things. And so the coding just becomes more complex and more complex to try to deal with the complex thing. Whereas the event-driven architecture is the decoupling idea, where you get to take all your company's things and all your hard stuff and make really tiny small steps, and then use event-driven architecture models to just put logic in between them, like if A or B, or if A is what happens, and this is the result of A, then go to B, otherwise go to C, right? As an example, like you wouldn't run tests, you wouldn't run stress tests against a production environment. So you'll be saying like, if the environment is staging, yes, no. If it's staging, then trigger an event to run the stress testing suite against staging and hammer it, right? You wouldn't do that in production. So typically to do that, you would have lots of complex scripting to do all this logic. Whereas with the events, it's like night and day, simple. So I recommend you check out both, but definitely check out Argo events if you're interested on like the where things are moving in the future. The highlight of this project is Jenkins X. It's an embeddable tool. I did talk about this already, so I won't go into too much more detail, but it's good for the slides. And ultimately, it's an embeddable tool that you can just drop in. It's actually written in Go. So Go produces a binary that runs on any machine. It's machine code. So you could just literally like wget or curl the binary down inside your pipeline, and then ultimately, you can just start to do stuff. And Jenkins X CLI is a plugin architecture. So it's got a plugin for Argo, and it's got a plugin for Jenkins X, and it's a plugin for Flux, and a plugin for all these other cool stuff that you may want to have in your companies, the new innovative stuff. And then you just trigger this guy and say, hey, do this thing, do that thing. So your old pipelines, let's say your old pipelines used to run your unit test suite, right? Well, you could actually have that actually on the new shiny system, and then using Jenkins X CLI, you could just in the old system delete the code for the unit test part because it's not what you want anymore, and then replace it with one line of just Jenkins X CLI run unit test pipeline on the target, boom, and it would go away and then come back with a code, bash code, exit code, and then your pipeline would be reactive. So over time, you use the strangler pattern to innovate and get rid of the old stuff. So it's also going to help us get to the future from all the old legacy stuff that we're still dragging our heels around with all the Jenkins stuff in the past. That's all I've got. Ultimately, I wanted to see if people have any questions. I'm sure people might want to have a conversation or two. So I see there's also a few things in the chat. So, okay, there isn't. Anyway, that's me, and I'll hand it back over to folks for
awesome
questions and talks.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, just give us a few minutes here, and people can ask questions here directly in Zoom webinar or on YouTube. So yeah, just we'll stall a bit, and the panelists usually come up with some questions here at this point, and I guess I'll kick things off. Can you tell us a little bit more about Cdu Foundation? I did some Googling while you're talking, and it looks pretty legit. So are you employed by them? Are you like, can anyone join as an individual, or do they only accept like companies? Like how does that work?
Yeah, well, the Cdu Foundation is employed. I'm not employed by Cdu Foundation. I'm a member there, but it's run by the Linux Foundation, and that they have employees. So they actually have the dedicated money and resources to run the whole, all the projects, right? So that's the employees. They're running everything. There's also CDCon, which is CD conference, which is like all about CD innovation. That happened 2020 last year, and I spoke there. And at that, it was a virtual meetup because we're in the pandemic. And then it just happened again this year, like 2 months ago, I think, roughly. So that was second year conference. So that's also CDCon. Myself, because was basically advocating, innovative practices on CD and CI solutions and doing conference talks around the world and doing training courses and workshops around that space, then ultimately they asked me to come on board as an ambassador as part of the team, basically. So I don't work
awesome.
there. It's just being, I guess, involved in open source and doing this stuff that ultimately I was doing. I was advocating myself for years and years and years, and then ultimately Cdu Foundation kicked off with other people, but as a proper foundation, and so ultimately there was a good synergy there. So I just joined in and just move forward together.
Well, congratulations. That's good. That's interesting to learn about that foundation, and I'm glad that Linux Foundation is kind of expanded out into these different branches, depending on the type of project and stuff. And obviously they've got a lot of things that they're involved with, but it's good to see them involved in on the Kubernetes side, and then the CD Foundation as well. Do you know if all the projects in the CD Foundation, are they all open source, or some of them
it's all open source?
Do some of them have hybrid offerings, like paid or kind of mixed, freemium kind of thing?
I think maybe Argo might have a hosted solution for you or whatnot, but this is all open source tech. It's like Git Lab, right? Git Lab is open source. You can run the community edition of Git Lab yourself for free, or you can get the fancy version and they'll host it for you, and you pay for that, right? So more like 90% are just pure open source, but I think maybe a few of the larger projects might be trying to do that. But can you see my screen still?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you see on my screen?
The presentation.
Yeah, it's changed. I know what happened. I shared just the window, so I was trying to show you my browser. One sec. I had the Cdu Foundation website up to answer your question. Okay. There you go. Sorry about that. Projects, if you just go down to projects, you'll see founding projects, which is these 4, which again, it's Linux Foundation, so it's they've got dedicated staff and they are taking care of all these projects. They don't run the projects, they just take care of them. If that makes sense. The people in the projects are still independent, right? I mean, not independent, they still run their project, right? Like Kubernetes, the Kubernetes team run the Kubernetes project, but it's being supported by the CNCF. We'll get incubating projects, and there's a bunch. I don't know where the page is. Oh yeah, this is the page here. Yeah, you can go and check out some things that have made their way up to this status. There's loads of projects in the world, right, that are doing stuff, and it's really cool. And I mentioned a few of them in my slides that are helpful, but these are the main ones in the world that have made it to that kind of status. That's kind of taken off. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I was a little surprised not to see Rancher listed here. I know they do Kubernetes orchestration stuff, and I think they have CF aspects to what they do, but maybe they'll join at some point. They're part of SUSE now.
Yeah. I guess we'll see. I mean, not everyone is here. Not everyone needs to be here. Not everyone needs help and support from a community or organizational benefit. But it's really just a pledge to say we believe in your project and we will support you to the end. That's what Linux Foundation is about.
Cool. That's good. Any more questions for Paul from the panelists?
Yeah, there's some more.
Yeah, there's a ton there. I'd love to, do a deep dive on Argo and Jenkins X. I think there's Kubvala sounds really interesting, and Tecton seems really powerful. I mean, anybody who wants to do some talks, definitely reach out and let us know. We're always looking for more speakers. But yeah, definitely more DevOps talks. I'm a fan, so we'll do some digging and find some more people to speak and give some talks on this stuff. So
yeah, this is basically Git Talks makes it developer friendly because it's like workflow driven, and also Flux is great at just letting you just take a Docker image and just deploy it, and it will manage it. You can do your rollbacks. It's very, very clever, very good, very reliable. So you can have your CI pipeline in Bitbucket or something. If you want to just do a build and run some tests and build a Docker image and run some tests against it, great. And then for the CD part, actually use a CD tool, right? That's my recommendation, is use a dedicated CD tool for CD and not the general purpose ones, which are kind of, they're okay, but they're more like CI tools, right? They're not specialist tools for a specialist job, whereas Flux and Argo and Spinnaker are indeed, and that's why the bigger companies use them. So definitely check out Flux. It's probably one of the easier and more lightweight solutions, continuous delivery solutions out there. Argo is a bit bigger, Spinnaker is a bit bigger than that as well, and Jenkins X is it's useful, but it's not like mature as the rest. So that's my kind of take on what to check out next.
cool. Definitely helpful info. That was awesome. I'm glad that we got a DevOps talk in. So please let us know if you want to come back and talk some more DevOps.
I expect the answer to this. I know the answer to this question, but because it seems like I would think all these tools and things would be pretty language agnostic. But is there anything that you've like? I'm trying to think of. I have to clap. I had a question. I'm bumbling. Anything that's better with PHP or pros and cons of PHP, or is it all just you can plug whatever you want into containers and workflows and all that kind of stuff? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, kind of. It depends on the context of what the tools are and what they're doing. However, I would say most of them is about taking an artifact, which we have an example as an artifact is a Docker container. So you build your own Docker container, right? How you want, and you push it to a registry up there, so it's there, and then you can then you deploy that. So a lot of these tools are dealing with the idea that you have an artifact, and so what's inside that artifact is what your code, your PHP, but it's just a Docker container that listens on port 80, and so, or whatever port you're telling it to listen on. So ultimately, a lot of these solutions are agnostic completely. Like we're at that innovation stage now in the world where if you have a Docker container, that's all we care about, and we just send it traffic, and whatever happens inside happens inside, and that's why the beauty of being cloud native is we don't need machines running with PHP on the machine or Java on the machine or whatever is running. It's inside containers now, so it's completely, we don't care anymore at this point. Just launch it and just send it up there, really. That was part one of the answer. Part two of the answer is some of the tools that you use for like local development and things like that, rather than like deployments, might be better integrated with certain languages. However, the ones that I highlighted are actually just they just run on like Linux. If it's your local machine, they just need you to have Linux installed, and then it just runs, right? Mm-hmm. So at the moment, I haven't came across anything that's like very particular to languages, but I guess your mileage may vary depending on what you're doing. But the short answer is no, they're not.
That's about what I figured. It's the PHP is a whole different layer than what you're talking about, so that makes sense. Thanks. Anyone else?
I'm surprised there's not more DevOps aficionados here. Maybe you did a good job of covering all their potential questions.
Maybe. So I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
How many of you are still using Jenkins, and how many of you are using new stuff?
It's both of that one answer.
Who's on Jenkins? Just do that.
We are.
Pretty much. Okay, it's still 90% of the internet.
We're looking to move, but we don't know to what yet.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Moved to GitHub Actions on our side. I've been using that basically since it came out with proper CI stuff.
Yeah, our company's trying to move over to GitHub Actions from Circle.
Yeah, like so when I mentioned about event-driven pipeline architecture, it's the first wave of innovation was the Circle CIs and the Bitbucket, right? And then 2-3 years passed, and then GitHub came out, right? So that's another iteration on the innovation, and they done things a little bit smarter. And then the open source tools have been getting built at the same time for years anyway. And then GitHub Actions done a few clever things, and so now they've incorporated that into a lot of the tooling. But that tooling is open source, not paid or whatever. So it's quite exciting that we've hit that innovation curve where we have slowed down to innovate from a commercial point. Like it's not really going anywhere necessarily anymore, and it's stable. And then open source can just sort of emulate that, and then we get it all for free again. So like a bit of a big cycle, and we're just right on that curve of cycle where it's about to just start flipping, really, back to open source.
And Git Lab is a thing too. I know there are big companies running on Git Lab, and before GitHub Actions, there was Git Lab runners, work very similarly. We do have a comment. Jacob Santos on YouTube says that he's still using Jenkins in Drone. They use Drone briefly.
Yeah,
but they're moving to GitHub Actions as well.
Nice. So Drone was the attempt at innovating open source wise for containerized systems, not like traditional systems. Because remember, when Docker kicked in, and nobody was using Docker, right? And then everybody's sort of slowly. So you'll had some systems that could handle containers, only containers, and then everyone else was just like, yeah, everything's like VMs and Ansible and stuff like that. So Drone CD and there's another one I forget, similar, and that was just like a containerized only system to deploy with.
Yeah, at one point we used Drone for a project, and it worked well, and then company policy started actually being enforced, and we had to switch over to Jenkins for our CI, but Drone worked while we were allowed to use it.
Yeah, it's just like it didn't. If the creator of that project kind of loses interest or things fade away, the projects kind of die off and they stop innovating or they keep being maintained. So one of the whole benefits of something being incubated by the Linux Foundation is that they're going to guarantee that you've got that support to keep it going. So that's kind of quite nice. And so if there's like a new project that's now alive and it's in there, we know it ain't going anywhere. Whereas Drone kind of fizzles out, I feel like.
As long as it's not bash scripts or something along those lines. Python, homegrown Python.
There's nothing wrong with bash scripts.
That's literally how I recommend. That's how I take people's systems, company to company, and I take all their crazy things out of the Jenkins files and other things, and I just write simple bash scripts that are agnostic, and they can be portable pipeline steps between any platform. So if it works, if you can run a bash command for like run unit test.sh or run an integration test or do something.sh, and then the pipelines become really dumb. So you can go from Jenkins to Bitbucket to whatever, and you can run it on your local machine. That's what I do. So I run the CI systems on my local machine because I can just re-execute the bash script and stuff. So anyway, that's a whole talk in itself. I give CI/CD deep dive talks, and I do 5-day courses and workshops and stuff around the world, and I teach people like really like 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 the high end pipelines and stuff. Anyway, and that stuff, it's Bash all the way. You're not going to change my mind on that.
Nice. I got another comment on what's wrong with bash scripts. I'm just saying building the entire pipeline in bash scripts and not having any CI/CD tools, like trying to I have to explain myself here a bit. I was trying to make a joke. Obviously, there's a lot of bash inside of Jenkins and inside of our pipelines. But yeah, sorry guys, I did not mean to bash on bash scripts.
As long as your scripts are in version control.
Yeah.
I had this cup for about 12, 13 years.
Is that the Atlanta?
It says got PHP instead of got milk.
Ah, it looks like the Atlanta PHP mugs.
I got it. I was on remember that website cafepress.com? Yeah, it was a while ago. I bought it on there, and I still got it.
That's where ours are from. So it's probably the same model of mug, at least. The big, good, hefty, large mug.
Yeah, we really should do some of those for merge, because that is still one of my favorite mugs.
Cool, thanks.
I also got a new elephant. It's a PHP 8 elephant as well.
Oh,
let's see it.
Right, hold up. It's in my. We had Scotland's PHP conference last month, so we had loads of stuff and swag and elephants are flying around, and I got a PHP 8 one, so I was quite happy with that. Hold on. I moved it for safety. You can see it. Oh wait, it's up here. Shit.
It's great. Love it.
Cool.
The camera's doing that thing where it gets the. Hold on. It's got like a jester hat on it.
cool.
That's cool. Why the jester hat?
I don't know, but it was confu.ca made them, so it's config guys have created
There's
this.
Le Fudoa is that model of elephant. So it's the jester sort of themey thing.
I think
And that's
the
for the
King's Fool
upcoming
is how it
conference.
translates literally.
I ran out of space on my desk. I think I'm going to need a bigger desk because I'm getting too many elephants. You know what it's like, I guess.
Yeah, I got lucky with this bookshelf behind me, so I can just fill it up with elephants essentially.
Well, any final questions or thoughts or anything?
I think we're good on the comments and questions. Don't see any more on YouTube. Nope.
Yeah, I'd say thanks for staying up so late, first of all. This has been one of the nicest things about Merge, right? So we can talk to people from all over the world, not just local. So it's cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
You're
we
welcome.
appreciate you being here with us.
Happy to be here, and maybe in the future we'll be doing it in person. If you've got a conference, if you've got a conference on that's happening, then I'll be able to come over and do some more stuff.
Did you know it's PHP UK virtual or in person?
I think it's in person. I got the email yesterday saying
it's in person.
apply. So
yep. CFP closes at the end of the month.
I think in the UK we've got Scotland PHP, which just happened, and then we've got PHP UK early next year, and then you've got, I can't remember exactly, and then after that you've got Yorkshire PHP as well. So there's the three in the UK that run. This is the Yorkshire one.
Yep. Is Yorkshire actually happening in person in 2022 or?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, we're good. So we've got 3 still over here. So hopefully we see some of you guys over here.
Yep.
Yeah, I see that.
Planning on applying to speak at definitely UK, and when the CFP opens for Yorkshire, I'll do that. Whereas over here, I think for 2022, it's going to be us at Longhorn, and then Midwest, and those are the only 2 I know of that will be back for 2022. I think Sunshine and PHP Tech will be back in 2023.
Yeah, I also heard that Adam is taking a break for 22.
Yeah, I mean the stuff cleared up late enough that he likes having like 5 or 6 months of runway on it, and he wasn't really able to get that at this point because of when 5 months of runway landed.
I'm going to go to sleep now because I have a 9 a.m. meeting with a customer. So fantastic. So I agreed to that, and then I realized I shouldn't have agreed to it, but it's done now. So I'm going to go and try and reset. And I hope you guys and everybody else enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
again
Paul.
for
Thank you so much.
staying up with us.
Always have a good night.
Yeah.
You too.
Good night.
Take care.
Yeah, Northeast PHP, no plans as of yet. I don't think we're gonna try to plan anything, at least until the pandemic's like under control. So,
When was the last one of those? They had taken a break before COVID, right?
yeah, it was a while ago. We took some time off to the people who were in charge of it initially kind of left like this hole of like taxes and like